I ngā mana, e ngā reo, ra rangatirama, ngā mana whenua o Tamaki Makaurau. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. And apologies for my voice, but some of you will know there was this event called Te Matatini, and the team that has my whānau in it, Ngā Tūmanako won, and I screamed, and this is the result. Can I firstly begin by thanking Annie for the invitation to come tonight. She actually emailed me on the 7th of February, and I responded and said I'd be happy to come and can I speak. And she was very welcome, and I want to acknowledge that ability for us to engage in what has been a pretty intense process up until now. And I also want to acknowledge that the Honourable Tracy Martin was invited, and also Jan Logie. They weren't able to be here, but I'm here representing, I think, a perspective that is a little bit different from the one that's been presented so far tonight. So acknowledging everyone here is here from a particular perspective. I might as well just put mine straight out there. I believe that trans women are women, and I support self-identification. What I want to do is just to really clarify the decision that the Honourable Tracy Martin has made from my perspective. Because accompanying her press release was also a Crown Law opinion, and that Crown Law opinion actually is incredibly interesting. But if we just focus on Minister Martin's press release, essentially what she has said is that there hasn't been sufficient public consultation on amendments to the Births, Deaths, Marriages and Relationship Registration Bill. The public weren't able to be involved in discussions about self-identification. And actually, I want to agree. The Health Select Committee that I chair, like all of our committees, we have bills that are presented to the House, and once they pass the first reading, we call for submissions, and the public absolutely have a right to have a say on the bill. And if that was circumvented because the Select Committee added information or added text to the bill that the public didn't have an opportunity to have a say on, then obviously we need to correct that, and we need to open that process up so the public can have a say. I think that the other reason we need to have a relook at the bill is based on the Crown Law opinion, and it was interesting when the Minister released her press release, she also released the Crown Law opinion, because in some ways it is and does align with some of the things you said, Annie, that in fact we need clearer statutory guidance, that it is ambiguous, and so unless we have standard policies and processes that are guided by law, there will be there will be ambiguous, there will be grey areas, and we will then have to go to court. And so the reality is, and for particularly our trans whānau who are out there, we didn't want to create a situation that actually made you more vulnerable to scrutiny and made actually some of the things that we would have thought you were entitled to, services, being able to engage in women's refuge, I think has been a context that people have talked about the issues to do with gender identity and where people are placed in prison, same-sex schools, for example, because of the because that was ambiguous. I think what this provides is an opportunity really to scrutinise, and I just want to highlight, it's particularly clause 21I in the amendment bill, which relates to current section 33, and it really is about the general law of New Zealand. And so I bring that up because there are some technical aspects that could have placed trans people in a detrimental position that will also be able to be reinforced by this deferral. I want to highlight that the Minister, in deferring, has made it really clear that she wants to ensure that the between 20 and 25 people every year who are going through the family court process to change their birth certificate are not detrimentally affected because of the cost, because of the time, and also there seems to be issues about the adversarial, intimidating nature of those court processes. So she's actually highlighted that those issues will be addressed in the interim. So that is a positive. And I also want to highlight from the Crown Law opinion that we now have 3 ministers actually engaged in this process. Obviously, we have the Attorney General, who's Minister Parker. We have the Minister of Internal Affairs, which is Minister Martin. But we also have the Minister of Justice, Andrew Little. And so we've recently had our periodic review in terms of our human rights scrutiny. And one of the things that he committed to whilst over there was adding gender identity, gender expression and sex characteristics as specific grounds of non-discrimination in the Human Rights Act. And we really do need to look at that because Crown Law historically have said it's already there under sex discrimination. So the fact that the Minister is committed to adding that specific addition to our human rights legislation actually warrants some congruency between the work streams. I thought I'd take the opportunity just to highlight how we've got to where we've got to. Because in 2007, the Human Rights Commission actually embarked on a process of talking to our trans community specifically. And as part of that process, they ended up producing a report which they released in 2008 called To Be Who I Am. And can I highlight that's why the trans community now is so disappointed. You know, they've been having these discussions for over 10 years. And so for many of them, they thought they'd got there because in fact, what people need to know is that the Select Committee has reported the bill back to the House and they all supported it. Every single party in the Parliament supported the changes in the Births, Deaths, Marriages, Relationship Registration Act. So it's a very unusual situation now once the bill has been reported back to the House, for the House through the Minister to then refer it back to the Select Committee, and we're all waiting for the outline of that process. But in that To Be Who I Am report, there were 4 points that were made. One was that trans people should effectively participate in decisions that affect them. 2, that the discrimination and marginalisation experienced by trans be reduced. 3, that access to public health services and treatment be improved for trans people. And that 4, the requirement for sex details on official documents be simplified. And then within that context, they also acknowledge that for financial, medical, cultural and other personal reasons, not all people will undertake medical procedures as part of their transition. And so I highlight that because that has been the context of the discussions since 2008 and how have we responded as a society. A lot of people have talked about the lack of congruency between driver's licence, passports and birth certificates. So it was in 2012 that the Department of Internal Affairs enabled statutory declaration so that people could change their sex on passports. And it was in 2013 that the Ministry of Land Transport, or Transport New Zealand, enabled through statutory declaration people to change their sex on driver's licences. And so we've had a very responsive public sector in terms of the recommendations from the 2008 To Be Who I Am report. And part of that, it also led to the petition by Alison Hamblett, which was presented to the House on the 25th of October 2016 and was reported back to the House on the 11th of August 2017. And essentially those recommendations of what the Select Committee has picked up. Now, I kind of outlined that for you because this hasn't happened all of a sudden. People haven't been deceived, and if you're in the trans community or in the LGBT community, many of us have been aware of the fight and struggle for our trans whānau to be accepted for who they are, hence the title of the report. And I want to say, why are we all here? Because at the end of the day, we know that our trans family are 5 times more likely to self-harm and suicide. Why? Because actually they endure levels of abuse, bullying, harassment. And for me, at the heart of this whole issue is how do we enable our kids to grow up strong, resilient, nurtured, loved, and able to be who they are. And so we know if we don't do this, that the outcome is suicide. So I put that right out there because that is, for me, what this is all about. And in fact, in Ireland, who enacted this piece of legislation, it's called the Gender Recognition Act in 2015, they've reviewed that act, and in the 2 years that it's been in place, so it became operable in September 2015, they'd had 297 applications for people to change their sex on their birth certificate. And they'd had 2 of the 297 who'd requested that their changed sex on their birth certificate be revoked. And why did they do that? Well, they did it because of human rights. And the main driver, I guess, in support of these changes has been our Human Rights Commission. I guess what we're grappling with is discrimination, if I listen to Annie correctly, the discrimination against trans people versus purported discrimination against women. And I mean, I stand here as a proud cis woman. I'm a member of the Māori Women's Welfare League, I'm a member of Pacifica, and I know when Jill Greer was the president of, or the CEO, sorry, of the National Council of Women, all those organisations actually accept membership from trans women. And so when I look at how our national women's organisations treat trans women, they treat trans women as women. And I want to highlight that there seems to be issues about what's happening imported from the UK. I'm the MP for Manurewa. I have 2 correctional facilities in my electorate. My engagement in this topic in the last term was because I was asked to go in and advocate for a trans woman in a male prison who was double bunked, and she was raped. And so my engagement in this issue hasn't been about women in women's prisons being raped by trans women in women's prisons. It's actually been about trans women in men's prisons who don't have a choice, who have been abused, and that's been horrific, trying to deal with a system that actually is applying the law. And in that correction space, it's really interesting because whatever your sex is on your birth certificate, in fact, that's where they have to place you. And I think what's happened in the UK, I welcome it here. I actually wrote to the Minister of Corrections, the Honourable Judith Collins, about this issue in the last Parliament and was advocating for a specific prison for trans people so that their health needs could be met. Because the other thing that happens is they miss out on seeing doctors and endocrinologists and having all the medications that they need. I don't really know if I can add any more value to tonight, other than to say it's really important that we have a respectful discussion and debate about this topic, because for some of the most vulnerable, this is incredibly traumatising. And I really worry about our trans people thinking that this process actually is trying to marginalise and undermine their identity. And I can hear, Annie, that that's not what's motivating Speak Up for Women. But unfortunately, you know, some of the way the discussion and dialogue is framed, it's either you're for trans people, which means you're against women, or if, and you know, the whole issue about names and definitions and all those sorts of things. I mean, I hear you, but when you say you're speaking up for women, obviously, from my perspective, I would hope that within Speak Up for Women, you would also be speaking up for trans women and making sure that they receive the care, the support, the love that they need to live full, healthy lives as citizens of our country. And so, from my perspective, I do think that this is a positive step. I do want to applaud the work that's being done in this space, and I guess I say to everybody who's got an interest in the outcome of this process to make a submission. Because in saying that women's groups haven't had an opportunity to make a submission, well, neither did the trans groups and our allies. And I know that there's lots of allies out there. I can see some of them out there now. And I'm saying that what this select committee process does is enable us to talk about human rights, social justice, how fair it is to have a medical procedure within the context of a society that's only prioritised 3 operations every 2 years, and for the last 5 years we haven't had a surgeon, so we haven't been able to help people transition to a point where they could go through the family court and change their sex on their birth certificates. So this is a discussion about resources, it's a discussion about priority, but fundamentally it's also a discussion about dignity, respect and rights as citizens of our country. So kia ora. I don't know when you sent me an email. If you're a constituent of mine and you live in Manurewa, then obviously I have an obligation to support you, but I'm sorry I don't recall getting an email to that effect. But if you're a constituent of mine, I absolutely have a responsibility to meet your needs as a representative of Manurewa. You live in my electorate? Do you live in my electorate? Right. Okay, so, well, I can apologise for not, but in terms of my mandate, I have a responsibility to meet the needs of the constituents who live in Manurewa.
Thank you, Louisa, and thank you for the question. Do we have any more questions for any of our speakers?
Can I just say to you, if you'd like some help, I'm happy for you to email me, because I can follow up, or I can direct it to the office that's most appropriate. So. Okay, so that was very brave.